I was once talking with two men. We'll call them Jim and Mike. Now, Jim and Mike were both leaders of Christian foster care agencies, and Jim and Mike worked in the same city. One day, a church leader came to Jim and said, "We were partnering with Mike, but we've had some disagreements. While we want to keep working in foster care, we would rather partner with you." Jim agreed to work with the church, but asked if they could first sit down together and invite Mike. Everyone agreed. Through that conversation, the church was able to talk things through with Mike and maintain the original partnership. Now, this move may have cost Jim a new partner, but the truth is, restoring a broken relationship between believers was much more important to him. As followers of Jesus, we are not just responsible to see that good things get done, we are also responsible for how good things get done. As famous missionary Hudson Taylor once said, "God's work done in God's way will never lack God's supply."
Welcome to the More Than Enough podcast, where we invite some of our friends to help you and some of your friends work together to provide more than enough, filling the biggest gaps for children and families before, during, and beyond foster care where you live. Here's your host, Jason Weber.
Hey gang, welcome to the More Than Enough podcast. Welcome to our special bonus episode. We got a chance to sit down with Peter Greer and Chris Horst, who are the authors of the book Rooting for Rivals. And I just absolutely loved this conversation. It was so fun talking to these guys. You know, the thing that I appreciate most about both in the interview and also in the book is just their transparency. Sometimes when you read books, you get the sense that this is a person who has this particular topic altogether, and that's why they are writing the book. In this case, these are guys just like us who struggle with feelings of competition and feelings of jealousy and a desire to get ahead, even in ministry. And they are honest about that, and they work through those feelings and they give them to the Lord. And in this conversation, you're going to get a chance to hear that and just hear some great practical things about how we can collaborate with others, partner with others, and most importantly, have unity with others in the body of Christ around the work that we do in our communities. So let's go ahead and jump into that interview with Peter Greer and Chris Horst. I'm here with Peter Greer and Chris Horst from Hope International, also co-authors of Rooting for Rivals. And it's such a pleasure to have you guys with us today. Thank you so much.
Joy to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So, you know, there are things that we all believe, those of us that follow Christ. There's a lot of things we believe. Then there are a subset of those things that we're passionate about. And then there are a subset of those things that we're passionate enough about to write a book about them. Why, Peter, did you feel passionate enough about this issue of unity in the body of Christ to write a book about it?
Yeah. You know, early on in my time at Hope, I had a picture on my wall, and it was looking at Hope International's growth rates compared to other organizations in our sector. And that was my measuring stick. That was my goal. And I believe that chart, that graph that was on my wall was absolutely counter to the ultimate purpose of Hope International. And it did really negative things in my life and in my heart and in my leadership. The first thing that it did is it caused me to look at these other organizations as if they're my competitors, causing me to look at my growth rate with Hope International compared to their growth rate with the other organization. And that does not foster collaboration. That does not foster relationship. And it causes you to either feel really good, hey, look at what is happening with us. We're growth rate is, better than the other organization, or it causes you to fall into this negative pit of, well, what are we doing wrong? And I just think that us versus them mentality, it was undermining joy. It was undermining effectiveness. It was undermining collaboration. It was undermining the shared mission that we have as an organization. And I never want to go back to that again. So it was really an opportunity to say, what is it that causes us to not be able to partner better together, and to try and diagnose that, get at the root of it, and hopefully to have a far better picture where we might one day be known for what we are doing together, much more than just what we are doing individually.
So, Chris, that all sounds really good, but our culture tells us that it's okay to think like that, right? It's certainly okay in business, and we ought to be able to run an effective nonprofit in some of the same ways that we run effective businesses. How would you respond to that assertion?
I do think that a lot of the pressures in our culture push us to view our rivals in a way that it's like we can only grow if they shrink. We can only take more territory if we're taking it from them. And what we've seen in the nonprofit sector and in the for-profit sector is actually that's not true. Actually, the opportunity in this era that we're in today is that we can grow more together. One of the best examples of this, I think, comes from the Bible translation movement. All the Bible translation organizations have a shared mission for working alongside each other to advance the translation of the Bible into every language in the world. And up until about a decade ago, they were doing that entirely separately from one another. So they were each pursuing their own aims, pursuing their own goals, all like friends with each other, but not actively working alongside each other. They were fundraising separately. They were marketing separately. They were training translators separately. And through the result of a number of conversations with some key philanthropists and some brave leaders in the Bible translation movement, they decided that instead of working in a friendly way, but working as rivals, they were going to work as allies. And so they formed a partnership called Illuminations. It's a long story. We outline it in the book. But they formed this partnership called Illuminations, where they said, we are going to actively join each other's mission together. And they started to share resources and share their fundraising strategies and begin to market together and communicate to the public the ways that you could get involved in the Bible translation movement, not just in any one unique organization. And the thing to me that is so powerful about this partnership is that collaboratively, they've cut off 117 years from what they independently said previously they thought would be the day when they could translate the Bible into every language in the world. So before that, they said, that was going to happen in the year 2150. And now they're saying it's going to happen 117 years faster just as a result of working together. So when I hear the pushback of, we have to differentiate ourselves, we have to argue why we're better than our peer nonprofits, I'd argue just the opposite. The evidence is that we can actually do more when we're committed to a broader mission and not just our own organization's agenda.
Yeah, I absolutely love that story. And I think one of the things it points out that is so incredibly relevant for our audience on this podcast is just the built-in inefficiencies in competition, right? The built-in overlap. We often use the phrase reinventing the wheel, and we sort of chuckle that off. Well, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, yet we do it every day because we're not talking to other organizations. I think one of the things I realized in listening through your book is that there is a theological component. There's a moral imperative to be unified, to work together, but there's also just a strategic, practical component. And so I'd like to talk to you about both of those. But Peter, can you talk a little bit about just the theological side of that, and how did you come to hold these values so dear as you looked at Scripture?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we did was just had the enormous privilege of picking up the phone or going and meeting individuals that by their peers were identified as some of the most collaborative, open-handed, generous leaders across sectors, across industries, some nonprofit, some for-profit, but we had the opportunity to have conversations with them. And there were several themes that came up again and again and again and again. And when it comes to the theological underpinnings of this, the two worldview differences that we heard from these open-handed, generous, collaborative leaders, the first is that they believe in a world of abundance, not scarcity. They don't believe that there is a lack of supply with God's resources. And so instead of fighting over a small piece of the pie, they say, let's do everything possible to grow it. And what Chris just shared about the Bible translation movement, that example is not just tied to Bible translation. The collective impact, there are more and more examples across sectors of exactly that principle, that instead of fighting over a small section, a small piece, it is possible to see the entire sector grow. And I love how Melissa Russell at IJM summarized it. She said when there were some friends that were looking at another campaign of another organization, and it was when the Ice Bucket Challenge was going for ALS, and this friend came to her and said, I wish that all of this attention was for you. But in a worldview of abundance, it's their focus does not in any way detract from what we're doing in our mission, and we can celebrate them. And she said, I believe in a God who took 5 loaves and 2 fish and fed the multitudes. That's the God that I believe in. That's a God of abundance, not scarcity. So let's stop fighting over a small piece. And the second worldview question is, do we believe that our highest calling is actually for the organization that we work for, or is it for the kingdom of God? Is our mission to seek first the good of Hope International, or the good of whatever logo is on your business card? Or is it to seek first the kingdom and his righteousness? Is that the ultimate calling? And so I think for all of us, we do have logos, we do have our organizations that we care deeply about, but we care more about the kingdom. We care more about the bigger picture of what we're doing together.
So good. And so if I'm a leader and I'm sitting here and I'm listening to this, I'm saying, yeah, I mean, I get it. I've read John 17. I know what Jesus prayed the night before he died. I theologically am on board with this idea of abundance versus scarcity. And so theologically, I'm all in. I'm all into collaboration and unity. And yet on a practical level, it's really hard, right? It's really hard for stuff to, not to creep into our hearts. And I'm wondering, Chris, can you dive in a little bit to some of that? You guys outline in the book some very practical temptations, right? And I love how you actually frame it as sin, right? It's not just hey, I'm driven and I'm competitive, and we sort of wear that as a badge of honor. You say, no, there are actual temptations to sin that drag us away from unity and collaboration.
Well, I'll share 2 stories from yesterday from my life that illustrate just how hard it is. I had a conversation over lunch with a friend that leads another nonprofit, an amazing organization. And over the course of our lunch, he said, hey, I know there's this family that significantly gives to Hope International. And, he asked the question, he's like, so I'm curious to know, like, would you ever be open to introducing me to that family? And do you think that there's a good fit between our mission and their philanthropy? And as he's asking the question, I'm just feeling like this gut check and feeling myself inside, kind of clamp up, like, well, this is our donor. This is a person that gives to Hope International. And if they start giving to their organization, which is amazing, would that mean that they give less to Hope? And, just this fear sort of sets in. Later in the day, a conversation with a philanthropist that doesn't give to Hope International. Very significant giving capacity. They give a ton to Christian ministries. And I'm having a conversation with this woman who leads their philanthropic giving. And over the course of the conversation, it's not, the chat does not go into Hope International's work. And I'm feeling this pressure in the call, like watching the minutes tick down from our conversation and recognizing that I might not have a chance to share about Hope's mission with her. And I'm feeling, again, that same feeling of like, if I don't do it now, like, will I ever get this chance? Should I make a case for Hope right now? Should I interject? So it is so hard. It is incredibly difficult because the gravitational forces pull us away from living in a kingdom way. I mean, we want to protect our own. We want to fortify our own castle. And we do not naturally feel drawn in to be about the kingdom. So we can theologically and philosophically support it. When the reality hits, it's hard to do this. And yet I'll say this, at every moment when I have felt that feeling and been able to be open-handed with donors that are not mine and with conversations that are not mine to direct, I have found, and we have found from talking to many who have really embraced these principles, that it is way more freeing, and it is way better for Hope International, and it's way better for the kingdom when we live in a way that's counter where the gravitational forces will pull us. So practically, it's, I guess the quick answer to your question is, it's really hard and it doesn't get easier. We've written a book about it and it's still really hard to do this stuff.
Yeah. And Chris, I think one of the things you speak to there so well is this idea that deciding to be a collaborator is not a one-time decision, right? It is a daily discipline of rejecting the temptation to seek the best for yourself and seek the best for the kingdom. Peter, what have you found is helpful just as a matter of rhythm and discipline to keep your heart in the place where you are a collaborator on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, I love that Chris shared examples from yesterday. And I probably have an example from this morning as well. So this is a real issue. And I think when I think about, so how do you actually live it out? How do you actually grow into a more kingdom focused leader? How do you make sure you resist that gravitational pull inward? For me, I think of three very specific and concrete ways. And the first is time. How much time am I spending in relationship with other leaders of or other organizations? And when I'm with them, what is the posture of how can I do everything possible to help you? So time with other leaders. And if you're not part of those types of conversations, if you're not making them a priority and all of your focus is internal, all of the things that occupy your headspace are all about internal issues, you're not going to grow into a more collaborative leader because you're simply not growing in relationships with others. So I think the first thing is, are you prioritizing time to meet, to develop relationships, friendships with other leaders of other quote unquote rival organizations? The second thing is to do a check on your prayers and on your messaging, for you to say, when we look at the amount of time that we are praying, how much of that is actively and intentionally focused on others? And I will not forget when another nonprofit organization simply sent us a whole lot of notes from their staff of prayers of blessing and encouragement for the organization that we're a part of Hope International. And they said, we're going to prioritize praying prayers of blessing for you as an organization. And they took that step to write them out and to send them. And there was a check on that. How much are we praying for others in our space? And then I think the third piece is our resources. I think it is a really healthy thing to give part of your family's philanthropic initiatives to quote unquote rival organizations, to actively and intentionally share some of your funds to say, you know what, I believe in the work we're doing. And you know what, I believe in the work that you're doing as well. And I have found that those gifts from our family have been some of the most high impact, not because of the dollar amount, but because it's a tangible expression of saying, we are with you. We are with you. And we are with you united in this grander mission of kingdom work. And so if we prioritize time and relationships, if we prioritize our prayers for others, and if we are actively giving to other organizations, I find that those habits end up shaping my heart to become more collaborative over time.
I love that. I love how practical those suggestions are, because often we feel like I just need to get myself to be more spiritual so that I feel like I want to do those things, so that I feel like I want to give away donors to other people. But what I hear you saying is these are disciplines, these are decisions you make ahead of time to do. And often with those kinds of things, as we know in the spiritual life, the feelings follow. the steps of faith, right? That you do the discipline, and then you realize the gloriousness of it and how good it feels to do that. It's like personal tithing, right? You look at your budget for the month, and it doesn't seem like this makes any sense. It doesn't seem like this would work. But if you're faithful to do it, you watch God provide. So I love how practical those things are.
We'll finish our conversation with Chris and Peter right after this. So if you've ever been to a summer camp, completed a ropes course, or participated in one of those corporate team building events, there's a fair chance you've done a trust fall. You know the drill. You stand on top of something with your arms across your chest. Several people, friends, colleagues, and people you don't know at all, lock arms on the ground below you. And then the moment comes when you slowly fall backward into a net of human arms. Now, if you haven't been a jerk to those folks all week, chances are the arms will hold your weight and everyone will cheer wildly. But if you've been a jerk, well, good luck, partner. Every interaction we have with a person is a chance to build trust. And when we enter into collaborations, we have the opportunity to build that trust and work together with other organizations and agencies to make a bigger impact for children and families in foster care. Now, you may be thinking, that sounds great, but how do I actually do that? What do I actually do first? Well, if you go to the episode show notes at morethanenoughpodcast.org, you'll find a free PDF. It's called Building Trust Together. And it's a document, it's a commitment that you make to others. And we've even personalized it for your state. And you can give this to others. And it shares 5 key principles or commitments you're making to them as you work to build trust with them and others in your community. Now, this document and the principles in it have helped guide me as I enter into new relationships, even as I approach hard conversations with leaders I've worked with for years. And I know it will help you too, to build healthy relationships as you work together toward more than enough where you live. So again, to download the free PDF of this commitment, and you can get one that is customized for your state, just go to the show notes for this episode at morethanenoughpodcast.org. Hey there, we'll get back to things in just a minute, but before we do, I just wanted to let you know that you can find the show notes for this episode by going to morethanenoughpodcast.org. You can find out more about our guests and what they do. We'll also have some resources there that can help you take your next steps to bring people together in your community to provide more than enough for children and families. Oh, one more thing. At the top of the show notes there are some buttons that allow you to choose where you listen to your podcast, and you can leave a review for the More Than Enough podcast there. And if you leave us a good review, there's a chance we might even do the happy dance. Okay, well, chances are there's going to be no dancing, but you will make us happy. Reviews help us to know what we're getting right and how we can give you more of the same. Again, all of this is at morethanenoughpodcast.org. All right, let's get back to the episode. Chris, you shared about the Bible translation example, and taking that example and through the grid of what Peter just shared about time with other organizations. I know that those leaders from your book, I know that those leaders were meeting at the Dallas airport, 10 organizations flying into the Dallas airport once a month. And we've been telling our leaders around the country that very thing, that if you're going to have the kind of time that builds trust, that builds a relationship, that makes up collaboration, you probably need to be talking to each other at least once a month, if not even more often than that. Can you talk about what you've seen with both that example and other examples in terms of the amount of time or how frequent truly collaborative organizations are talking to other leaders?
I think Peter illustrated the possibilities when a lot of people start doing small things consistently. And I can look at the Bible translation project, the Illuminations collaboration, and frankly, it's intimidating because, we're looking at them today, 15 years or 12 years after when the very first impulses began to happen and those prayers began to happen and that generosity, personal generosity began to happen. But that multiplied over time. We're at this point today where they're lockstep, working alongside each other, meeting in the airport every month, at least, that up until recently, that's how they've really grown this movement. And it can be intimidating. But I think to look at our wallets, to look at our calendars, to look at our hearts and examine them and ask, like, are we may be like kind of giving lip service to these ideas, but are we actually, in the ways we live our lives, are we actually doing it? And I do think spending time together is critical. And I also admit it's hard. It is hard to think about spending time with our peer ministries when you feel like I could be spending time with donors, I could be spending time with our staff, and we're investing time in other organizations, other ministries, and their involvement in the kingdom. And yet I kind of go back to the story of the woman with the flour and the oil, where she kept going in and there was more flour and there was more oil. I think in some ways that's what we've seen to be true with living out these principles and rooting for rivals, that as we do more of that, somehow there's more margin. I can't explain it. It's not a formulaic thing, but somehow as we take risks for the kingdom, it feels like God provides and sustains and re-energizes us and renews us in our own organizations and our own mission. So it's something that I definitely feel tension around. I'm not going to suggest that when I see another call with another development director at a different nonprofit, or another call with another executive director looking to build their organization, there's part of that feels like I'm not being a wise steward of my time. It's not the highest and best use of my energy. And yet, I think as we take those risks, God will provide.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, when you talk about organizations, leaders, and one of the things we say is that organizations don't collaborate, people do, right? It's about a person, one organization, talking to a person, another organization. And, you know, I think all of us can relate to the feeling that we've all been part of attempted collaborations where groups of people get together and maybe 2 or 3 meetings in, there's different sort of things that begin to fray. You know, one of those can be, you know, hey, we're getting together and it just feels like it's, you know, as I, you know, I live in Texas now. And so one of the phrases here is all hat and no cattle. Like we're talking a lot of vision and rah-rah, but we're not getting anything done. What are some of the other, and this is for either one of you, what are some of the other sort of things that begin to fray at a budding collaboration?
I think of the phrase that, you know, it's almost like we are all porcupines in need of warmth. And so what do the porcupines do? Like they try to get together because they know they need the warmth, and yet they keep poking each other on that. And I don't know, that image for me of like porcupines, we know we need to be in relationship, but we keep poking each other on this. And so when I think about what it actually takes to have a long-term collaborative approach, the thing that comes to mind is a whole lot of grace, a whole lot of empathy and understanding, and a whole lot of kindness, even as we go through this. So there's like a heart posture here. If you're going to be in relationship, you got to keep real short accounts of things that were done that kind of, you know, ticked you off a little bit. You have to have a whole lot of grace and maybe a little bit of intentional amnesia to get over things in the past. I think that's kind of the heart posture. One of the practical application points, though, is I think the more specific and concrete you can get, the better. If you are trying to get alignment in every single aspect of an organization, or if it is some sort of high and lofty goal that does not somehow translate into a very concrete action, I think it's going to lead to a level of futility of, we know we want to collaborate, but what are we actually doing here? And I think that's one of the reasons why when we look at all of the examples of really transformative collective impact work, the Bible translation, there's several that happened with school. I think that what you're doing with More Than Enough is one of the best examples right now that I am so absolutely thrilled for. When you look at one of the things that they have in common, it is there is a specific, tangible goal that they share. And so what is the thing? When we say we collaborate for what ends? And yes, we can grow in relationship with a lot of people, but if we're going to actively collaborate, tell me what's the one thing that we're all going to be joined together in focusing. And the more you can have clarity on that, the more likely it is to have meaningful, life-giving partnerships. I think about a real simple example. When I was in a refugee camp after natural disaster, and early on, one of the leaders came together and said, our goal is to support this community. Let's talk about what the organizations do and what they do well. And one organization was expert in water, and so they were going to make sure that community had water. The other one was an expert in housing. They're going to make sure housing is there. The other one is an expert in other sorts of supplies. And that element of the goal, the singular goal, is to provide for this community. That allowed everyone to bring their very best and to have clarity around what matters. So I would say as much clarity as what you're trying to do together, the more clarity you can have with that, that will guide and that will aid whether or not this really is a meaningful, life-giving, valuable partnership that you're entering into.
I love that. I love the phrase intentional amnesia. That's so good. I think, we sometimes what holds us up is we think, well, we can do this better than that other organization can, or we just fight with all of those things. Or this organization one time did this and it really bothered us, and so and sometimes we just have to intentionally forget those things. I love that. So, Chris, what do you feel like is when you bring a group of people together in a community, and this is particularly applicable to our audience, is that we're looking at collaboration on not a large national or international scale. We're looking at groups of people in communities who already know each other, and so many times already know each other. And so there can be particular challenges to that, right? Because there's an additional knowledge of history. There's an additional set of biases that work against us because we either don't like or whatever, or offended by something that somebody else has done. What advice would you have for people who are in a small community who maybe have known each other but haven't worked together in the past or haven't worked together very well? What would you say are some first things they can do to get that ball rolling and to intentionally forget about some of the things in the past?
Well, one of the phrases I've come to appreciate in seeing some of these collaborations take place is that unity and uniformity are not the same thing. Mm-hmm. And I do think that there's a level of acknowledging that we are different, and your work is different than ours, and we approach things a bit differently, and that's okay. That's actually going to make us stronger, the fact that we aren't identical replicas of each other. And so when a group starts to come together, I look at the campus ministry movement that Peter alluded to. Every campus is a collaboration between Campus Crusade, now called Crew, InterVarsity, NAVS, Young Life, CCO. Most of the largest Christian campus ministries are now partnering together. They have a map of all the campuses in the country that don't have or do have campus ministries, and they're working together and saying, which campus are you going to? Which campus should we go to? But the thing that started that whole thing was prayer and mission, and recognizing that even though CCO does things different than Navigators does things, and Young Life at the university level does things differently than Crew, they're recognizing that they have a shared mission to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ to our universities around the country. So that's a shared mission that they have. And they also are all organizations that believe in the power of prayer. So for those groups that are beginning to work together or maybe nervous about it, I would say lean on and kind of weight the agenda toward mission and prayer. Open up with, why are we doing this? So which children in the community are we here to serve? And share those stories of foster parents who are leaning in beautiful ways in the lives of kids who are hurting. Share the ways the churches are stepping up and caring for and celebrating adoption and foster care in their congregations. Begin with mission and begin with praying together. And what I've seen play out and what I've felt is that as we do those things, those areas of not identical uniformity begin to feel less significant. And we're reminded of the fact that even in spite of our baggage and the layers and the interpersonal like ego and relationship challenges, that we can work through those things because it's worth it. For these kids, it's worth it. For this mission, it's worth it. So you begin praying together, talking about why they're sharing stories of impact, then get into the specifics of what are we doing and how can we do more. But when you lean on that mission and prayer, I believe a lot of those things, those differences become less significant.
I love that. That is a perfect place to start, which means that this is a perfect place for us to stop. Thank you both so much for the work that you do in your everyday jobs, but also the work that you did on this book, Rooting for Rivals, which is available everywhere you get books, both in old-fashioned paper form. I'm an audio guy. I like listening to books, and so also available there. And grateful to you both for writing that book and being an encouragement to so many.
Well, we are rooting for you. Love what you're doing, and it's been so fun to be with you today.
Thanks, Jason.
Oh, what did I tell you? Those guys are awesome. And the book Rooting for Rivals is fantastic. And if you have not read it, then you should definitely do so. And if you have read it, it's worth taking another look at again. Great reminders for all of us who are trying to work together in unity to help children and families. I want to close our time together with a story. Back in 2019, at an IAAF International 10K, Simon Cheprot rounded the last corner of the course and got ready for his final sprint. But then he saw that his teammate, Kenneth Kipkemoy, had collapsed just shy of the finish line. Simon bent over, helped his friend to his feet, and as other racers sprinted past them together, they slowly made their way across the finish line. He was later asked why he had stopped and given up a victory, and this is what he said. My dad told me one day, when you're walking and you meet a sick person on the road, help him. Do not leave him. So that was the first thing that came to my mind when I saw my friend on the ground. He explained, running is not war. Running brings peace, unity, and friendship. Simon knew that just being a winner was not the whole story. It was more about the kind of person he wanted to be. Just like the story of Jim and Mike at the beginning, just like the stories shared from Peter and Chris, as followers of Jesus, we are not just responsible that good things get done. We are responsible for how good things get done. Well, that's going to do it for today. I want to thank our guests, and I want to thank our producer, Amanda Baird, and our audio engineer, Daniel Davidson. And I want to thank you for all that you're doing on behalf of children and families in your community. And our prayer for you is that you would be able to legitimately root for rivals, that you'd be able to cheer for one another in your community so that more children and families can get the care they need before, during, and beyond foster care until there's more than enough.
This has been the More Than Enough podcast. Join us next time as we introduce you to more of our friends who are passionate about helping you and your friends work together to provide more than enough for children and families before, during, and beyond foster care where you live. Explore show notes and learn more at morethanenoughpodcast.org.